And I just wanted to say, Bruchim Habaim. I wanted to say welcome to everybody, and a huge thank you to Joel Levy for organizing this gathering. Really appreciate it. It's particularly timely to learn about Ethiopian Israelis just at the start of, well, what I think in Israel is the start of SIGD. We're not quite there yet, almost. But this is an important Ethiopian Jewish holiday celebrated 50 days after Yom Kippur, a day of accepting Torah, yearning for Israel. It was thought to be the date on which God first revealed God's self to Moses. And while SIGD has been celebrated for generations by Ethiopian Jewish community, it became recognized as a state holiday in Israel in 2008, and has now become, really this year, the last couple of years, has started to be a little bit more well known in America. But it has served as a time to increase the visibility of Ethiopian Jewry, and to raise up the voices of Ethiopian Israelis. And so, Joel, I know we were thinking about this for a little while, but I think being able to do it today is particularly appropriate. And so it feels altogether fitting that we at PSJC are able to welcome really a great teacher, a PhD candidate in sociology. You can't beat that. And at Tel Aviv University, a powerful activist and chair of the Association of Ethiopian Jews, Efrat Yerdai. Sorry. We're honored to have you with us and to listen to your thoughts about the place of Ethiopian Israelis today, and to hear about your work advocating for social change, for civil rights, and for justice for Ethiopian Israelis at a time when we're struggling in America with identifying and trying to dismantle systemic racism in this country. I feel like yours is a particularly important voice for us as Jews in America to hear. And so with that, Brucha Haba, really welcome to our community. And I want to hand it over to Joel Levy, who, without whom this could not have happened. Let you, Joel, bring this conversation forward. I do want to let people know there will be an opportunity for questions afterwards. I'm going to keep folks on mute just for the sake of, for the sake of Zoom, which can't handle cross conversation so easily. But feel free to hold your questions. You can put them in the chat if you, as well, if you're afraid that you might forget. And I just saw a note in that chat before we begin. Yom Huledet Sameach, happy birthday, Joel Levy. What a beautiful way to celebrate. And with that, I hand it to you.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much, Carrie, for the very nice introduction to everybody. And I wanted to have this for a number of reasons. One is that PSJC is trying to do two things, and they both come together. And I think Efrat is just the perfect person to bring those together for us. One is to increase our involvement, engagement with Israel, and to educate ourselves more about Israel. And the other, that's been ongoing for some time, but more recently, our concern with Black Lives Matter in the United States and social injustice in the United States, and an effort by us as a congregation to engage on that subject in the United States. And it occurred to me that Efrat, who is one of the leaders of not Black Lives Matter, but of her community in Israel, is engaged in a parallel struggle, similar in some ways, but different in many other ways, to tell us something about the Ethiopian community in Israel, something about herself, and about the general subject of racial and social justice. So I thought both things come together. The day was chosen not because of my birthday, although it's a wonderful way to celebrate my birthday, but rather because SIGD, the Ethiopian Jewish holiday, actually has already begun in Israel. It will begin here in a few hours. And so I'd like to begin, we will just have a little conversation, and after that conversation, we'll open it up for others. But Efrat, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. The rabbi has already described you as a PhD candidate and an activist and a leader of community. I know that you earlier this year won a very important prize from the New Israel Foundation for your work in promoting democracy in Israel. But if you could more personally, before you come to the professional, just your own life. You were born in Israel, I believe, something
Yeah,
about
so
family, your parents, etc. If you could begin there, that would be wonderful.
sure. So um, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Um, I grew up in Israel. I was born in Israel. I'm 39 years old. I'm an activist in the last 15 years, and now I'm the chairperson of the Association for Ethiopian Jews. But I think what mostly shaped my uh, political identity or activism was the fact that my parents were activists, but I didn't know that until very late. I grew up in Israel, as I said, and I always heard the stories of the Aliyah from Ethiopia, the immigration from Ethiopia. And the story goes like this. In November 84, and Hercules, IDF soldiers, Israel came to Sudan and saved Ethiopian Jews from hunger and persecution and civil war and all these stories that I'm sure also American Jews are well aware. But the images that the mainstream Israelis have is about saving Ethiopian Jews. And my parents and the story I grew up with did not fit to this story that I was filled with on TV, in school, everywhere. You always get like a story, an item on TV with the Mossad guy or a soldier or a pilot that tells how he came at night and it was dark and no one knew, like all this heroic story of IDF soldiers, which is like, it was very moving, but I knew a totally different story. My father arrived to Israel in 1970, and he was here without any civic status. He was illegal immigrant. And he got a deportation order by the Ministry of Interior in 1971. And he had to hide from the authorities so he can stay in Israel. And he was the one to start a struggle for recognition by the state that Ethiopian Jews are Jews, though they are Black. And they have the right to naturalize Israel under the law of return, and not as foreign workers, and not as tourists, and not as pilgrims, as some of his friends arrived here in order to understand what's going on. So to grow up in Israel, to have these stories about how the state of Israel saved my parents was very confusing for me because I heard a totally different story. My parents found a very weird way to arrive to Israel. And my father left my mom in Ethiopia with a 1-year-old baby, and she joined him after 3 years, lying to the authorities in Ethiopia that she's going to visit, and all this story about how my parents arrived here. And they were the one to really start a political campaign in order to bring their families and their communities. And in 1974, they also joined the American Association for Ethiopian Jews that was led by Dr. Grenum Berger, rest in peace. And they did cooperation when the states were denying their work and they didn't accept what they're doing. So I think this experience of life helped me understand that not everything that you see on TV or in news or the way people speak, and they speak very confidently about what they know and what is the history and all that, it's not so clear. And I also understood that history, though that sometimes when we think about history, we think about something big of nations and cultures. And I think that history is something very personal. I think that the history of my parents really shaped who I am. my self-esteem, my confidence, my identity, why I insist on specific things that this is who I am, this is my life. And the gap, to see all the time the gaps as a student, to read materials about Ethiopian Jews, which are so flat and so not understand it, nothing about this culture, people that call themselves anthropologists, brought me to do things like to criticize this article, to establish a blog. We established a blog, Young Ethiopian Students, that criticized the way researchers in Israel study the Ethiopian community. And I started to write in newspapers. And I turned the spokesperson for the Association for Ethiopian Jews in 2010, the association I'm working with now as the chairperson. So that's how I developed my activism and also my awareness. Like in the beginning, it's something very intuitive, that you understand that something in this world is wrong, but you don't know why, just a feeling. And then you study, and then you read documents, and you learn from your parents mostly, because every time I read something about Ethiopians in the university, I had to do to check with my parents, is it like this? So that's how I actually developed my activism today.
Efrat, did you, you mentioned that you were born in Israel, but was yours a small family? Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have 5 brothers and sisters, so we are 6, and my parents. I'm married. I have a 1-year-old and 4-month baby. My
Hagar.
first. Yeah, her name is Hagar. And actually, that's interesting because you know, as an Ethiopian in Israel, married to a Russian speaker, it's very problematic to go to the Rabbanut and get married. So we decided that we'll do the ceremony Kadat Moshe Israel, but we will not do it with the Rabbanut. We will ask from a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, to do it, but we decided that this is for us, and it's not a matter of the state, it's not a matter of the Ministry of Interior. So even in the most personal things, you need to find a way how to do it in a way that it will be you and it will be authentic. So the Israeli complexities.
Yeah, Efrat, could you tell us something within the Ethiopian community in Israel about how many people are there and where do people in the community live? Are they all concentrated in one place or they spread across the country?
So the Ethiopian community in Israel is only 2% of the whole population. It's around 180,000. And they live all over the country, but mostly what we call the periphery. In more poor neighborhoods. This is part of an Israeli policy that somehow found a way to gather poor communities in poor areas. For example, you can see it when the Ministry of the system of absorption centers in Israel. Every new immigrant, new Ole Hadash, come to Israel, and you can choose to be in absorption center for 2 years in order to just digest where you are and study a bit Hebrew. But this is a choice for new immigrants to Israel. But for the Ethiopian community, it's not a choice. It's obligation. It's mandatory. So this is the only community that the state don't let them choose. So for example, you see the neighborhood where my grandma lives in Ashkelon, it's 100% Ethiopian population. This is because the state encouraged the new immigrants to buy this apartment in a very low price. So that's how you make you really make build a situation, create a situation where there is 100% Ethiopian population. And that's something that affects the lives of many Ethiopians in Israel. Because if you live in an Ethiopian ghetto, so you will have a ghetto school, a ghetto healthcare, everything is like this. Like we know that. Maybe I'm jumping forward to our next question, Joel.
That's okay.
But you know from the United States that you already understand that separate can never be equal. But in Israel, it took a few years. So in the beginning, we also had this problem beside the neighborhoods, the problem of the state thought that Ethiopians should have special programs for Ethiopians in the IDF, in school, in elementary school, in high school, in universities. And our organization always said, no, you can't give special programs to Ethiopians. You can give special program to new immigrants from Ethiopia. That's okay, but not for Ethiopians based on the skin of their color, the color of the skin. So this was a long process. Only in 2016, after a lot of criticism that we were always talking about it, that there can't be programs based on Ethiopianness, the government got this decision that it's not, it can't be legal to have special programs for Ethiopians. Though the state, in the beginning, it was like from a good thinking, because they came from a third world country, so we'll help them. The problem is that another problem is that I, as a Israeli born, was also included in these programs. So they didn't have any differentiation between Ethiopians. They just said all Ethiopians. So the Ministry of Absorption never dealt like with new, not never dealt, didn't deal only with new immigrants from Ethiopia, but with all Ethiopians, which is, this is what we call in our organization institutionalized racism. Like that the Ministry of Absorption, the only community that the Ministry of Absorption deal with, although they are not new immigrants, it's people from Ethiopia. And that's similar to people in the 50s. That fits to the way the state treated Moroccan, Tunisian, Yemens, but we're not in the 50s. Like it's, I don't mean that in the 50s it was okay, but we're not there. And we can.
Can I interrupt for a second just to ask another question?
Yeah.
You were saying that Ethiopians in Israel should be treated in the same way as all other Israelis, and nobody could disagree with that. But I'm curious about the question of Jewish status, which I know has been a controversy in the past. The question of whether the Jews or the people from Ethiopia are genuinely Jewish was very, very controversial in earlier years. Could you bring us up to date on that? Are Ethiopians in Israel accepted completely as Jewish? Are there rabbis in the Ethiopian community, and are they accepted as rabbis, etc.?
Is there a term in English, Pandora?
Pandora's box.
Wow, that's a whole, wow. So you interrupt me in the middle of something I was wanted to say, but that's bring me to your second question. The why we say that only the Ethiopian community was treated that way by the state, because we have a clear example. You know who immigrated to Israel in the 70s and the 90s? People from USSR, Russian speakers, that were treated totally different. And we see it live, the same time, even in the effort that the state did in order to bring Russian speakers to Israel. Meanwhile, on the same time, in the 70s, when my father is knocking on the doors of Jewish Agency and the Ministry of Interior and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, so they were really working hard in order to bring the Russian speakers, while denying the Ethiopian Jewish community. So this was a big story, of course. And in 1973, after Rabbi Ovadia Yosef met my father and other Ethiopian activists, and also a guy named Chezi Ovadia, rest in peace, a Yemenite guy that is a Amharic speaker, grew up in Eritrea. That's a whole different story. So he was one of the big supporters of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef ruled Psak Halacha based on Rabbi Cook, Rabbi Hilzheimer from Germany 150 years ago, Aradbaz, Rabbi David Ben Zimra from Egypt. Like there is a whole שאלות ותשובות, like questions and answers that the Ethiopian Jewish community, people met this community already during the Jewish history, along the Jewish history. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef reconfirmed what is already been said before. For example, during the time of Rabbi Cook, he called to save Ethiopian Jews from missionaries in Ethiopia. Like we have all these documents. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef ruled this halacha in 73, but he was only the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. He wasn't the chief rabbi of Israel. So this is my research subject, all the politics behind the naturalization of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef made this halacha in 73, and the Ministry of Absorption was shocked from this rule of halacha, and they asked from a guy named Professor Yosef Litvak to write a report that explains why Ethiopian Jews are not Jews and why they cannot fit to our modern state. So this is a report called the Falashas. This is the name that been used toward Ethiopian Jews. The Falashas, 30-page, where he explained how the primitive and how they have disease, and it would be better for them to stay where they know in Ethiopia. They are part of the Ethiopian culture. They are part of they are not resemble any Jewish origins. Like, you know, in the 70s, we still had like this conversation about how Jews look like and how Jews do not look like, and all these crazy talks. So this, in the Ministry of Absorption had this report in order to reject what the rule of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And the thing is that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was chosen to be the Sephardi chief rabbi a year later. But he was under a lot of pressure by the Ashkenazi rabbi that didn't accept his rule. So he made another rule that they are Jews, but they need to make a restrict conversion. So to summarize, in the end, that was the decision, but only in 75, the government of Yitzhak Rabin ruled that they are that they can be naturalized under the law of return. The thing is that this rule of halacha was never accepted by the Israeli Rabbanut.
Mhm.
Only 5 months ago, 2020, the Rabbanut of the State of Israel accepted the law of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef from 73. Can you imagine? You know what is the results of that? The results of that is why I wouldn't go to the Rabbanut to get married. Because every Ethiopian that go to the Rabbanut, they will send him to Ethiopian rabbi that need to say that he know his grandparents and his grandparents, and that they are Jews. And this is something that this is something that can repeat. This is marriage. This is the nice side of the story. But we have all these stories of Ethiopians that work in a wine factory, and for some radical Haredi, it's considered nesech wine. You know, it's they are goyim. Some mashgichei kashrut, people that keep the kashrut in restaurants, they can say this woman is not Jew, she cannot work here. Though leave the facts about like what the matter. Like it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or not Jewish if you work in a restaurant. Like I don't know how it was in the galut, right? But all these kind of situations that remind Ethiopian Israelis that they are not part of this place. So this is the story of the Rabbanut, but this is like the political, the policy level. But there is a deeper question, like as Jewish people, what is being a Jew? Is it a matter of blood? Like the what is his name? The Luther, the Protestant guy from Europe that said that the Jews are a matter of blood. It's not a matter of spirit. Like this is the idea, the base of Nazism, right? Like, but I believe that Judaism, it's a matter of faith. It's not a genetic story. And I don't want to have this discussion about genetics and about biology, because I know history and it's never goes to a good place from what I know. So this these arguments were during all the Jewish tradition, all Jewish history. You know, I just learned a couple weeks ago that Rabbi Yehuda Levi was thinking about Judaism as origin, as blood, and Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, he was thinking about Judaism as a matter of faith, a matter of culture. So this is, I think, I prefer the Rambam attitude, but I think in our generation, and especially as Jewish people in the state of Israel, it needs to be a different discussion, but this is a heavy issue in Israel.
If I can interrupt again, that was really quite a wonderful explanation of a lot of history and of a lot of politics and so on. I wonder if we could just make a slight transition. If you could tell us something about the association of which you are now the chair, what the association does. I did notice as we're speaking that one of the people on the Zoom asked the question, how do we support them? Could you, and I see that somebody else already provided a link to where one can make a donation. So that's wonderful. And I thank the people who have done that. But I wonder if you could tell us something about the Association for Ethiopian Jews so that we can understand something more about what you are doing to confront and to correct the situation which you have been describing.
So the Association for Ethiopian Jews is the veteran association of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. It was established in 93. Before 93, it used to be the American Association for Ethiopian Jews that was established in 74. And then part of the management decided that there's still work to be done. After there is Aliyah, we still see that there is problems of discrimination and integration and all that. So what we mostly do is advocacy and lobby, which means that we are collecting data. There is because the Ethiopian Jewish community is very small in Israel, so the formal bureaucratic authorities doesn't collect materials and data about the Ethiopian community. So many times we need to ask from the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Employment to give us the data about the situation of Ethiopian students. And when we see and when we get the data, we find out the gaps and we raise awareness for these gaps, and we work with also politicians and decision makers to make the change that we that need to be done. For example, actually, you said, Rabbi Kerry said that the Sigd holiday was recognized officially by the state. This is the work of the Association for Ethiopian Jews, but this is a work of decades. For years that we demanded from the state that many Jewish communities in Israel that came from all over the world, we celebrate them different cultures, and the Sigd can be part of these different cultures. So this is something that the Association of Ethiopian Jews did, and in the end, we have this holiday that all Israelis are celebrating and mentioning, and it's something very special. Another thing we did is, for example, the affirmative action law that was relevant in Israel in employment and in the public sector was relevant only for women, Haredi, and Arabs. And we demanded from the state to include Ethiopian Jews in this law. What it means that all public sectors must have 1.7% of Ethiopian employees. But you know, in this kind of situation, we have the law. It doesn't mean that everything is changed. So we need to follow if the ministries are doing the work and if the municipalities have this percentage of workers. But it's never end by having a law. A couple years ago, we had this data from the Ministry of Health, for example, that they were so proud that they have 60% of the workers are from Ethiopian descent, and we were very surprised. So we had to check the numbers and to understand what's going on. And then we found out that 99% of their workers are unprofessional workers, maintenance workers, and cleaners, and this kind of things that we always, like 10 years after we managed to include Ethiopians in this law, we still need to check that it's working and what's going on in these fields. Another thing we're working on in the last app. So what I told you before about the separated programs for Ethiopians. So this is something we also promoted for years, that Ethiopians don't want help based on their skin color. We want you to support people that need help because economic status, okay, or people that need help from the state, but not because of their Ethiopianness. So we managed to cancel all the special programs. But you know, in the end of the day, we see that after a while, these programs turn into an industry. So in 2013, the state comptroller had a report on these special programs for Ethiopians. And he said that most of the money is being absorbed in the system, in the managers, in the NGOs, in the organizations. And in the end of the day, a small amount of money arrived to the people. And this is something we said for years. So every time we have an official authority that confirm what we already said, this is something very important for us. So it's work that takes years. It's not advocacy and lobbying. It's not something that you can. There are many nice projects that you can take nice photo of an Ethiopian child playing a piano or something like that. We're not doing things like this. We're doing a very like policy work, policy change. For example, also you have this. I wanted to say that this is a new topic, but it's not. all the story of police violence. This is something that we are working on for many years, and we have a problem because the police in Israel is one of the most not transparent organizations in Israel, and it's very hard to get data from them. And we always need we get into a situation when we threatening to go to court, and then we get the data, because in Israel, I yeah, it's different from the States, but some places it's similar. um the police is always in a defensive reaction. Like they always said, we need, for example, we would say, you need to understand that racism is a phenomena that exists in the police. And you need to start to use terms of racial profiling. We know it exists. You gave us the data. The gaps are too big. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense that Ethiopian men have double chance to be arrested by police officer. It's not a criminal community. So we're working very hard to raise awareness, and sometimes, not too many, we find people in the police. We look for good people in the police that would like to work with us, really, that understand that there is a problem. Because for us, we can't allow ourselves to say, oh, the police is wrong, it's bad, it's racist, it's corrupt. And so, for example, we did a project that we call Model Ashkelon Bet Shemesh. Ashkelon Bet Shemesh, it's two cities in Israel. We found out from the data between 2014 to 2017 that the best place to be Ethiopian with their relations with the police is Ashkelon, and the worst place is Bet Shemesh. And we wanted to understand what is going on with the police station in Ashkelon, that there are no gap, like there is no gap between the amount of arrest, of detention, of all this relationship with the police. And we found out a very interesting picture of what's going on in Ashkelon. But one of the main thing we found out, beside the fact that the Ethiopian community in Ashkelon is very involved in the social life in Ashkelon. And for example, the head of the student association in the College of Ashkelon, she's Ethiopian and she's very involved. But one important thing we found out is that the head of the police station, when he saw the demonstration against police brutality in 2015 by the Ethiopian community, he decided that he is going to deal with this issue personally. And he took it as a project. This is someone that he told us that it's never crossed his mind that he will suspect the claim of the Ethiopian community that that there is police brutality or police violence toward Ethiopians. If people, thousands of people going to demonstrate against police brutality, there is police brutality against this community. People are not bored and going to the street because they're bored. So when he decided to do this, he told his police officer that any situation that they have with Ethiopians in this city, they need to let him know. And that's how they dealt with it. So this is something that we know that can happen. For example, he told us a story about a police officer that called him in a situation when he wanted to arrest an Ethiopian guy, and he told him, and he asked him why. He said he's walking on the beach without shirt and he's alone. So 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 this is something that young guys can be arrested for, something that when it's a white person, you don't think that there is something weird.
Efrat, it's
So
probably not
yeah.
exactly your intention, but you're pointing out so many similarities in terms of social attitudes and problems between Israel and the United States. And I just wonder if you might say a few words, if you're knowledgeable about it, about Black Lives Matter in the United States. Is there any parallel between Black Lives Matter and perhaps the work that you are doing in Israel? And that would be, I think, something that would bring us to the few minutes remaining for people on the call to ask any questions that they have.
I think that we live in a world that the American culture and American history affects us all. And I think we're not in the era of globalization, we are in era of Americanization. So this is part of our culture. So not only Ethiopian look toward America, all the whole world is looking at America. And also, I think that the experience of Black people in white spaces is, in many aspects, are similar. I know it's different. It's different because I'm glad that we don't have 400 years of slavery in the state of Israel, and that it's different history. It's different. Like when I think about Black women in the United States, it's totally different from my experience. I can have an experience of being exoticized by white people around me, but I don't have this collective memory of what is it to be a Black woman in the United States 100 years ago. So it's totally different. But when we see the way police officers behave, when we see the policy of the state, when we see the amount of Ethiopian people in jail, you can't ignore it. So there is different baggage, there is different narrative, there is different of in collective memory. But in the end of the day, the last line is a bit similar. So we don't have here the industry of prisons. Like we don't have private prison here. So I feel that we are lucky not to have it here. But so also there are different structures that make the life of Black people in the United States worse than what we have here. So it's the history, and I believe that is a very radical capitalism that in the end of the day affects mostly brown, Black, poor communities. So, but from the other hand, so you understand it's a bit similar, it's a bit different. But also when I think about my activism, I couldn't also I couldn't only refer to my parents. Like I wanted to read things about my experience. So the people I loved were African American writers, African American history. So it will be Bell Hooks and Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin and all these crazy writers, amazing people that inspired me. I couldn't find myself in Jabotinsky or the kibbutz story or this kind of like other stories that I couldn't feel connected. And when I read these African American writers, I realized that like I can have these feelings, I can have these ideas. That's something like I had my family and I have the African American culture and history and writing. So it's not in the past. It's still very inspiring for me to learn from the power of this community there. But also, I feel that I can't be jealous in what's going on in America as well.
Efrat, it's very hard to interrupt you because we all want to listen and hang on every word that you have to say. But we have a question from somebody here, Donnie Marku, a member of our congregation. I'll ask Donnie to ask first, please.
Hi, first of all, this is fascinating. I was born in Israel and I'm aware of most of this stuff that you're talking about. And what really bothers me even more regarding the police situation with the Ethiopian community is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but um, the police population in Israel is comprised of a high percentage of a sector that suffered police brutality and racism in the past, and to see how that is passing now to their own, racism, just really bothers me personally. Um, Now, my question, and it may not be directly about what you described, but since you're from Ashkelon and we just had a little group discussion before this discussion, can you tell us a little bit about the situation and the story, maybe as a background of the Avera Mangisto?
Hmm. I would like to ask you to answer first about your comment. I think that there is a problem of people that been rejected by the mainstream. So you always need to prove that you're part of Israel. So you're talking about Mizrahim,
Right,
the people that used to live in the ghetto that my grandmother lives now in Ashkelon.
right,
So when you're always been said by the mainstream that you are not Israeli, you're Arab, you're primitive, you need to always always in this situation of proving that you are part of this place, and you have to cooperate with the power, with the people in power. So this is this process. When I think about the United States, I know that African American used to feel in Brooklyn actually not comfortable with Jewish people in the moment that Jewish people a little bit turning to be the principal in the school, the guy in the grocery store, all these small low middle class. And there is actually an article by James Baldwin. The title is very provocative. He said, "Why Negroes are anti-Semites?" The conclusion is because the landlords are Jews. So this is a um, simple sociological process that we live in a world that you need to uh, to get on someone in order to be something, which is very sad. But I can't also judge these people because the police in Israel, for example, the one of their solutions is to have more Ethiopian officers in the police, and we say no, no, we don't want more Ethiopian police officers in the police station. We want you to deal with your violence and racism and corruption. It's not a matter of culture or if you have more. We know that when you have Arab police officers or Arab soldiers or Ethiopians, what does it mean? They will be under pressure to show that they are the most Israelis. And to be Israeli, you need to be patriotic, you need to be violent. This is the circle. So we always say, no, you don't need more Ethiopian police officers. You need to deal with the problems you have in the institution. So about Avera Mengistu crossed the border to Gaza 6 years ago. He had mental problems. His family was ignored by the government for a long time. Worse than that, the guy in the prime minister office threatened the family that if they will go public, they will do nothing to bring back their child. So this is a very sad story. But you told me, I heard that some of the people in the class, put bishat bidud, am I correct? You learn a song by Shlomi Shabbat and Eden Alena, and we see more. There is a group of Ethiopians and non-Ethiopians activists that talk about it all the time and trying to raise awareness. And now these two famous people also had this song, but in the end of the day, we need to the government to include Avera Mengistu in all its discussion toward missing Israelis.
Efrat, if I may, we're running out of time, unfortunately, and I would just like to, as the final question, call upon my sister, Emily, your colleague.
I don't know if I have a question for Efrat. Having a good time.
What? Sorry.
I'm sure. Are you enjoying yourself, Efrat?
Yeah, totally. I feel I speak to.
I know. Efrat will call me tomorrow and say, "How was I?" And what I'll say is, "Terrific." I just want to say thank you. I don't have a question. I just want to say I want to applaud two people, if I may. One is Efrat, who I've gotten to know. I'm a member of the board of the Aguda, of the association. And it's truly more than an honor and a pleasure and fun. It's inspiring to know Efrat and other people like her who are dealing with, as you've heard, incredibly difficult, challenging, absolutely aggravating situations, doing it with grace and with determination and with wisdom. And that makes me proud to be part of the effort. So Efrat, I thank you, and we'll continue together. The other person who I want to commend is my brother, if you don't mind. I know you all know him and so on. What I mostly want to say, and I told this to Efrat, what you don't know, or maybe you do, today, Mr. Joel Levy is 75 years old. This is his birthday. So I didn't know you were going to plan this night for your birthday night, Joel, but I want to wish you, as you've always been, a model for me and a person who cares about issues, personal, social, whatever. And thank you for making this evening happen. And thank you for being who you are. And happy birthday.
Thank you very, very much. And several people have asked, and the links have been provided. So join Carol and me to celebrate my birthday by making a donation to the Association for Ethiopian Jews in Israel and support the important work that Efrat and her colleagues are doing. And Efrat, thank you very, very much. This was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
you. This was wonderful. I wish we had 3 more hours to listen.
Thank you, and a happy birthday from London.
Thank you, Robert. Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to hear. And thank you very much.
Is there any chance of getting a list of contemporary Ethiopian writers and poets, particularly those translated into English?
Listen, I would love to I don't know if you're all in the mailing list of the, anyway, I'm sending my email. So if some of you feel that you want to read more, to learn more, to talk, so feel free to send me an email. And of course, we would love to have any amount of donations to our organization.
And I know that both Pete Poot and Dif Doof are exploring Ethiopian Jewish culture, writing, songs, things like that.
Me and Joel
Michal is the person.
are going to continue with exchanging materials.
Yeah,
Laura,
absolutely.
Laura, if you're still on this, can we add this organization to the Tzedakah Fair?
And
there you go.
And Sarah and Angela, we already have a short list that we actually looked at in Dif Doof. We read some Ethiopian material last week. So Michal may have a longer list, which she might be able to provide of some of this literature. And of course, Efrat will provide more. But
yeah. And I think that Tomer and Zahava will
Translated
both
since my Hebrew
happily
is
add
hopeless.
some.
yes,
Tomer and Zahava, their specialty is taking things from Zahava's our shlicha in the New York area, shlicha and she happens to be Ethiopian as well. And so between the two of them, their specialty is bringing Israel into for American English speakers. They'll be able to help us also. But Efrat, thank you for all the resources you've already provided.
Right. Someone mentioned Dalia Bitawlin Sherman. I wrote a review in Haaretz when her book was released. So here is the link here.
There we go. Just take Efrat's email and you'll
Thank
be,
you.
we only hope you can finish your PhD once you're connected to PSJC. You're going to get a lot of notes.
I'll just close by saying, Efrat, that everybody here and there, we're all very fortunate in having you as one of our leaders.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.